At this point, you've gone through the gauntlets multiple times. You've conquered most, if not all, of Special Interception, you made it past chapter 20 or so in the story, and you can do all the challenge stages from events. The question is, what now? Apart from just maintaining your account casually and collecting cool new characters, what Nikke offers is something Genshin doesn't after 3 years: real endgame content. Every month, 2 raid events will occur, running for a week each. A solo raid that usually happens on the second week of the month, and a union raid on the latter half of the month. It's time to prepare your best units and head into the ringer once more, because this is where your build and skills are put to the test. In this final volume of my detailed series of guides called Cummander Bootcamp, I'm going to give you the rundown of what to expect on these raid events and why doing them is overall good for late game progression. This is one of my most anticipated videos that I will be making, so let's begin. To answer a question real quick, raids are technically optional. They can be accessed from these small icons on the main screen, so it's like they're not given as much focus as campaign or normal events. If you're serious about getting into raids, something I think a lot of people should know is that they're usually going to take a much bigger chunk out of your daily playtime, and in times they're highly time sensitive. However, a major advantage of getting into raids is that it's one of the few ways to still make progress in the late game. If you take a look at the shop, you can exchange the currency of union chips to purchase some items that normally can't be bought anywhere else. One of which is the spare bodies for the rehab units, and the other is the batteries that can be used to upgrade your harmony cubes. Meanwhile, solo raids also providing a supply of these batteries, as well as some gems, and a shiny new avatar border if you're competitive enough. I'll talk about the rewards a bit later, but let's go through how to prepare for raids. Let's talk about union raids first. The prerequisite, you guessed it, is that you must be in a union to participate. How union raids work is that each player will have 3 attempts per day to deplete as much of the current boss's health as possible, and scoring is based on how fast your union is able to fully clear all the bosses, if at all. Before you blindly sign up for a union, there's something to consider. The 3 attempts you have must be completed with different characters, meaning you would ideally have 3 teams or 15 characters built up and ready to go before a raid starts. You cannot use the same character in multiple attempts. Once you have that, it's time to enroll in a union. But we're gonna be smart about this, as the total scoring is dependent on the whole union's performance, and we certainly don't want to be tied down by inactive teammates. Something I recommend is to go to Nikke's official Discord server, and in one of the channels is a union recruitment chat. This is where different players post recruitments for their unions, and they'll likely be listing what your best team's minimum combat power needs to be, do you have X character, how competitive they are, and what server you play on. After that, it's just a matter of messaging them and letting them know that you're interested. It's like applying for a job, except there's no 5 rounds of interviews and you actually get the job most of the time. Once you're in a union, wait for a raid to start. How it works is that there's 5 rounds of bosses per stage, and each stage growing in difficulty until stage 10. A union can have a maximum of 32 members. Assuming each member does their part and does their 3 attempts a day, a total of 96 attempts can be made in a single server reset. Ideally, a single player is doing their attempts at a time, as the system can be wonky if multiple players are playing all at once and could end up wasting points. If your union is competent, they'll likely have a Discord channel or something similar that lets members communicate during a raid. A couple etiquettes when it comes to coordinating with your team. Let everyone know that you're doing your attempts so no one interrupts, and also when you're done. Another thing to watch out for is that you should try not leaving a boss's health at a really low amount. Nobody wants to clean up your leftovers, if you know what I mean. If you're close to beating a raid boss, attempts work the same way as Special Interception. Just restart the stage and see if you can do better. As long as the level clear screen doesn't show up, you haven't used up an attempt. Another tip during raids is to pay attention to what the boss is, and what element it's weak to. I talked about elemental damage in the last guide, and you're really gonna start its effects here. Having a couple lines of that is really gonna be a difference maker. If you don't have a lot of characters built up yet, that's totally fine. Just remember that you still need 3 distinct teams to get the most out of your attempts. When it comes to elemental damage, it's not just how much damage you do. Certain raid bosses will also be different from their counterparts in the campaign or challenge events. For example, in this version of Blacksmith, its cancel rings can only be depleted with a weak element, meaning bringing a water code unit is a soft requirement. If you don't bring one, you just can't complete the cancel ring and you'll just die. You can either mock battle it, or in some cases, your union will let you know if any element requirements are in place. Once you do your attempts, all that's left is to let your teammates do the rest. In some unions, they even post a spreadsheet of who should be attacking at what time. Now, unless your union is filled with whales, you're not expected to fully clear the 10 stages on the very first day. A good placement to go for, considered by a lot of competitive unions, is the top 50, as they get listed in the rankings leaderboard. My union, whose name is... I don't know. During November's raid, we actually did manage to place in the top 50s. Other than bragging rights and some additional union chips, you don't get anything else. So union raids are really just a community-driven environment for some friendly competition, and it brings all players closer together, which is why I think if you can, definitely participate in it. You absolutely do not need to be a whale in order to place high on the leaderboard. You just need a good union where everyone has well-invested accounts. Now, with the union chips you got, the item you should prioritize are the batteries for the Harmony cubes. Specifically, if you haven't already, I would level the Resilience and Bastion cubes to 7, as their effects get maxed out. Then you can slowly level the other cubes too. I personally would not buy the spare bodies for the rehab units, unless you really like them, of course. It's just not as efficient with your chips. This is going to be somewhat of a controversial thing, but I think they can add a monthly cosmetic item like an avatar frame here to be purchased with union chips, as I think that will nudge people to participate in union raids more, but hey, that's just my opinion. On to the next type of raids. Solo raids are, exactly as the name suggests, they are done by yourself. This is going to be the ultimate test of your builds, because the rules are a bit different. You'll first start by clearing 7 stages of the raid boss with increasing difficulty. You still get 3 attempts per day, but you must deplete the boss's entire health bar within 1 attempt in order to proceed to the next level. But wait, it gets spicier. Unlike Union Raid's attempt system, in Solo Raid you will battle with 5 teams instead of 3, meaning you will ideally need 25 built-up characters for a full attempt. Within each attempt, you will do the 5 battles, and you must beat the boss within those 5 battles in order to proceed. If you do not, the boss's health will be completely restored. This is different from Union Raids, where every attempt counts as 1 battle. Ideally, you'll clear each stage with 1 attempt each, and since there's 7 stages and a challenge mode at the end, you would fully clear the 7 stages by day 3. But wait, because I've saved the grand finale for last. The challenge mode is where you'll compete with other players' scores. Again, not a lot of players focus on this, but the main draw of Challenge Mode Solo Raid is that you'll get gems based on your performance. And here's the juiciest bit. You'll also get a limited time avatar frame depending on your leaderboard placement. This is the thing that I imagine that incentivizes players to compete in this raid. To understand how the placement system works, I'm gonna break it down as it's not exactly the most comprehensive. If you take a look at the reward tiers, you can see a tilde symbol next to a percentage. This is actually a little bit misleading. You would think that if you scored somewhere close to the percentage indicated, you'll qualify for that reward tier. But the number displayed on the side actually represents the upper limit of your placement for that tier. For example, if it says 2%, it really means 1.01% to 2.00%. If it says 3%, it means 2.01% to 3.00%. This means if you score in the top 3.01%, you will get dropped to the tier below. If you look at the cutoff, in order to qualify for the tier 3 avatar border, it means that your placement must read below 3%. So you must score within the top 3% of players. If you think this is hard, in the first ever solo raid, you had to score within the top 1% in order to qualify for the tier 3 border. So they actually eased the requirements. In challenge mode, you get 3 attempts a day, and these attempts are counted separately from the previous 7 levels. All your units will be locked to level 400, so everyone's on a somewhat even playing field. The game will take the attempt where you got the highest score as displayed on the page. Because your units are going to be level 400, expect the numbers to be in the billions mark. Normally, I don't play solo raid competitively, but in November's raid, I actually went for the tier 3 border, since that month's boss was Ultra with a weak element of Iron, and I had a lot of the Iron DPSs ready to go, the main ones being Red Hood, Snow White, and Maxwell. It took me quite a while of grinding, but I eventually did reach the top 3%. Something to note is that everyone who started before you is going to have an advantage, and unlike challenge events, there is a set amount of players that can get this reward. At the end of the day, it's a cosmetic item, and it's mostly stat-based how many points you get. Don't worry at all about the gems. If you place in the top 10, you would have spent way more than what they're giving you to whale your way to this point. I don't know how often I'll participate in solo raids, as they do take up a lot of your time to get it just right. If you're curious, I will estimate that you would have to score somewhere around 3.5 billion points in order to stand a good chance at landing in the top 3%. I had 3.6 billion last time, and I was in the 2.3% mark. I have been playing since launch, but I consider myself as a low spender. So to some degree, hopefully, I was able to show that you don't need to whale in order to get the tier 3 border. You are gonna need some knowledge of team building to fit 5 good teams in one attempt, and a bit of skill thrown here and there. One last thing I will warn about the solo raid is that you shouldn't let your guard down until after the event finishes. If you got a high score on the 3rd day that qualifies you in the top 3%, you may not still be there on the very last day. This is because a lot of people do the challenge mode on the last 24 hours of the event. Since it only counts your highest score, people just mock battle as many times as they want, then get in that high score once at the end. So never let off your guard until the event ends. Overall, a lot of the raids in the endgame really depend on how long you've been playing the game. Don't think that any player can just waltz in and become the best with no investments into their account. Most of the time, people with more time in the game will generally get a higher score than you. But hopefully, I've also showcased that you don't need to whale in order to perform well in these events. You just need some dedication and some time. The Union and solo raids are good examples of endgame content done right in a gacha game, and can even bring you closer to the community. Anyways, that's gonna be the last of Cummander Bootcamp for now. This has been an exciting journey all the way to the late game. Hopefully, I've proven that there's still plenty to explore and improve on even after you think you've done all there is in the game. Thank you for watching as always. I'm personally looking forward to the Christmas event, and always remember, have fun with the game.